When Disney World closed the notoriously scary Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter in Tomorrowland in 2003, they sought to replace it with a much friendlier, more age-appropriate version of the show based on one of their new movies. One that they hoped would be more popular with younger guests. But what they got instead was a tacky, gross, cheaply made attraction that gained a reputation as one of the worst things in the whole of Disney World, and one that still scared plenty of children. So let's take a look at the infamous Stitch's Great Escape, how it failed, what eventually became of it, and why some of it still sits in partial abandonment in Magic Kingdom. I've already covered the story of Disney World's scariest ever attraction in one of my earlier theme park videos, so I'm not going to go over the entire history of Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter here. But to understand Stitch's Great Escape, it does require some relevant background information. Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter was a key part of a push in the 1990s to modernize the Disney theme parks, and make them more appealing to older kids and young people. A push championed by, of course, then Disney CEO Michael Eisner. Alien Encounter specifically was intended to be a much edgier, much darker experience than typical Disney attractions. The show would invite visitors to a convention center to watch a demonstration of sci-fi teleportation technology that would inevitably go wrong, as a carnivorous alien would accidentally be teleported into the room and break free, pacing the theater in complete darkness, as terrified guests would remain strapped to their seats, unable to move, with various audio, visual, and physical touch effects simulating the creature's movements. Alien Encounter was supposed to be scary. Disney achieved exactly what they intended, but Disney had done their job a little too well, as they received numerous complaints from unassuming guests about the intense nature of the attraction. Despite the warning signs dissuading families from bringing their young children into the show, its low height requirements, and also its presence in a theme park which, by the way, was named Magic Kingdom, resulted in all but the very youngest kids being just one clueless parent away from a traumatizing vacation memory to last a lifetime. Its reputation preceded it, and its attendance waned. And by the early 2000s, it was obvious that the attraction had to go. It just wasn't a good fit for Magic Kingdom, and management sought to replace it with something a little bit less intense. But the question was, what would that be? Alien Encounter had itself been a remodel of Mission to Mars, a similar, much less terrifying theatre show depicting a journey in a rocket to Mars, taking place in the same rooms and with the same layout, just with different theming. And whatever the redo might be, Disney was hoping to get away without spending a large amount of money on it. Since the start of the 21st century, the company had been forced to become increasingly budget conscious, after the difficult openings of new theme parks and a run of lackluster box office performances from their big budget animated movies. And so it made sense that the new attraction would have to be a quick, easy retheme of the theatres. Thankfully, a new arrival to the Disney universe would prove to be the perfect candidate. 2002 had brought the release of Lilo and Stitch, a relatively lower budget Disney movie that was a much bigger success than their previous releases, performing reasonably well at the box office and hugely well when it came to home video and merchandising. Stitch was everywhere, mostly because Disney put him there. But the general public was responding very positively to the lovable blue alien that was now appearing on store shelves. Stitch was the obvious choice to replace Alien Encounter. He was recognizable with guests, and very popular. He was way less scary than the original Alien, and from a family-friendly movie so guests would have prior knowledge of what they were walking into, and Stitch was also an alien. So a lot of the existing attractions theming wouldn't even need to be changed, saving majorly on renovation costs. Towards the end of summer 2003, Disney released the direct-to-video Stitch the Movie, followed up by the new Lilo and Stitch TV series on September 20th. And the very next day, with Stitchmania in full swing, announced that Extraterrestrial Alien Encounter would be closing for a new Lilo and Stitch themed attraction. The concept art Disney released depicted the same Alien Encounter theatre, but this time with Stitch in the teleportation tube instead of the previous carnivorous alien, and the accompanying press release promised a prequel set shortly before the movie, showcasing the mayhem Stitch caused when he was first discovered by the Galactic Federation. Guests would be recruited by the Grand Councilwoman from the movie as extra security for the difficult alien, who would inevitably cause havoc during the show. This announcement was clearly incredibly rushed, with Disney closing Alien Encounter permanently just 3 weeks after the announcement, as work got underway on the newly named Stitch's Great Escape. Construction walls were thrown up around the former Alien Encounter building, decorated with fake newspaper headlines hinting at the new attraction's story. The Tomorrowland Convention Center logo was replaced by one for the Galactic Federation Prisoner Teleportation Center. Disney gave Imagineers a very low budget for the retheme, and so as expected, many of the elements from Alien Encounter would be reused. The harnesses that kept guests seated, all the major elements of the pre-show, and many of the special effects would all remain. For the same reason, the show's story would still broadly center around the same teleportation mishap. But Disney did promise guests that the attraction would contain some of the most advanced audio animatronics technology ever developed by Walt Disney Imagineering, which would have to be brand new. Disney planned to open the attraction sometime in autumn 2004, a turnaround of about a year. And finally, on November 16th, Stitch's Great Escape officially opened to the public. To promote the new attraction, Disney launched a new, unusual marketing campaign. At the beginning of November, an email was sent out to pass holders in the style of a top-secret file, containing Stitch's mugshot and paw print, inviting them to early previews of the attraction. In companion to this, Disney also launched a website named StitchEscape.com, which displayed pictures of Stitch on the loose around Magic Kingdom, climbing the castle, riding Dumbo, and photobombing families. This website also contained a downloadable Stitch desktop buddy and a PC game where you help him find parts for the teleporter through a point-and-click puzzle at different Disney World locations. Upon completing the game, you'd then get to see photos of Stitch riding different Disney World rides, and you'd receive a printout you could take to City Hall at Magic Kingdom for a free sticker. But the more significant parts of the promotion of course happened at the park itself. On opening day, guests would arrive at Magic Kingdom to find large banners over the tunnels under Main Street train station, and a gigantic inflatable Stitch sat right at the front entrance. Entering the park itself, they would find that Stitch was already on the loose, with several wanted posters up along Main Street. They could also pick up a Stitch wanted pamphlet along with their park maps, and they'd quickly see the destruction Stitch had caused when they looked down Main Street to find Cinderella Castle covered in toilet paper, with graffiti declaring Stitch is King scrawled on the side of it. Definitely up there with the weirdest castle decorations of all time. The castle would be the site of the opening ceremony, a show which opened with security officers roaming the sides of the stage, searching for the loose alien. Cobra Bubbles from the movie would then appear and warn the crowd about Stitch's escape, but assure guests that nothing was wrong and they should go about their day as normal. The typical Mickey and Friends castle show would start, but would be interrupted by the arrival of Stitch himself, who would take over the show. He'd eventually be captured by Cobra Bubbles and the Magic Kingdom security, who would lead him away to Tomorrowland, encouraging guests to join them at the Prisoner Teleportation Center. And arriving here, guests could finally get their first look at the brand new attraction. The entrance hall had been decorated to be the new receiving room at the teleportation center, and the TV screens on the wall that had previously played a video introducing the shady XS Tech Corporation now instead played a message from the Grand Councilwoman and Captain Gantu, who would welcome the guests as new recruits to be guards at the facility, where the universe's most dangerous alien creatures were kept under control. Guests would then move into the second pre-show room, the area that had previously been Alien Encounter's teleportation demonstration, featuring the sinister robot Sir, voiced by Tim Curry, and the lovable test subject, Skippy. In the new pre-show, nearly everything had remained, just quickly redecorated to fit the new story, including Sir and both versions of the Skippy animatronic. In this new version, Sir was now voiced by Richard Kind, and was named Sergeant C4703BK2704-90210, and was dressed in a blue uniform. He would explain to the guests that as it's their first day, they'll only be dealing with small-time Level 1 prisoners, like the Skippy animatronic imprisoned in the tube beside him, who was arrested for jaywalking. He would then receive a transmission from an officer who would teleport in another Level 1 prisoner in the second tube. Fans of Alien Encounter would recognise this as the second Skippy animatronic that gets burnt from the teleportation mishap, appearing in the tube after a smoke and light effect, but now just slightly redecorated with some green goo to at least try and make him look like a different character. Suddenly, the demonstration would be interrupted by Captain Gantu, who informs the sergeant that there's an incoming Level 3 prisoner, and all the recruits are required immediately in the high-security teleportation chamber. Guests would then be hurried down a dark corridor to the main theatre room, largely unchanged from Alien Encounter, and strapped into the same harnesses as before, as Captain Gantu appears on the screen at the side of the room with two technicians, Ombit and Gecko, preparing the chamber for the incoming teleportation, at which point the main show would begin. With more laser and smoke effects, guests would get a look at the new prisoner, Experiment 626, or Stitch, easily the biggest budget part of the attraction. The former alien animatronic that had inhabited the chamber had been replaced by a new, very impressive Stitch animatronic, who scanned the room while animatronic tracking cannons kept him at bay. Stitch would then begin to spit at guests as a water jet sprayed at the audience, which would cause the cannons to become confused. The aliens in the control room would panic as the chamber's power decreased and eventually hit zero, plunging the guests into darkness. With the power shut down, Stitch would escape from the teleportation tube, and special effects would simulate him scurrying around the room, just as the alien had done in Alien Encounter, but this time in a more light-hearted way. Sound effects would make it seem like he smashed a guest's phone, and the speakers in the seats would make it sound like he was sniffing in your ears, and the harnesses would bounce up and down as if he was running across them. One of the most famous, or perhaps infamous effects, was when he would steal a chili dog, and then let out a loud belch, filling the room with a chili dog smell. Finally, Ombit and Gecko would bring the emergency power online, and some of the lights would come back on, but Stitch would continue to wreak havoc as the cannons chased him around the room. The Stitch animatronic would then reappear back in the teleportation area, but would hijack the controls and teleport himself away. On the screens, the aliens would track where he had teleported himself to, and find that he'd landed on planet Earth, in Florida, at Magic Kingdom, and Stitch would be shown on the screens riding Astro Orbiter, a video segment that would change to match the time of day that guests visited the attraction. He'd then escape off into Magic Kingdom, presumably to cause more chaos, and guests would be released to exit the attraction. The expectation from Disney was that Stitch's Great Escape would serve as a welcome change to the overly intense Alien Encounter, providing a more light-hearted take to the loose alien story that families could enjoy, and one that capitalized on the success of their new franchise. Unfortunately, reception to the new attraction was pretty poor. Guests, by and large, hated it. In particular, many guests complained about the show's gross-out humour. Stitch spitting at guests and the chili dog effect were both heavily criticised. And honestly, despite it succeeding in being less scary than Alien Encounter, Stitch's Great Escape was still too scary for the young kids it was trying to appeal to. Sure, it had replaced the carnivorous alien with a lovable, recognisable character, and a lot of the more intense special effects were gone too, but the fact still remained that the attraction was based around being plunged into darkness with a creature scurrying around you. And so, just as with Alien Encounter, as soon as the lights went out, children started screaming. Young kids were still leaving Stitch's Great Escape in tears, and so after a one-time mistake, guests would then avoid the attraction entirely. In summer 2005, I visited Disney World and had my first and only experience of the show. I was only 6, and as you might imagine, I absolutely hated it. And alongside the casual guests, the more committed Disney fans had plenty of reasons to hate the attraction too. It was incredibly apparent to anyone that remembered Alien Encounter just how much of a cheap retrofit this new show was. The pre-show animatronics were all quick reskins. The main theatre and many of its effects were holdovers, just toned down and worse. Just about the only significant addition was the Stitch animatronic, which spent a lot of the attraction's runtime not even visible. It was clear that this was just a cheap and easy change, pasting a recognizable character into a tacky rip-off of what came before it. Very similar to the change that was made to Magic Kingdom's Enchanted Tiki Room 6 years earlier, and one that was regarded as a pretty big downgrade at that. Complaints filled fan forums, hopeful rumours were spread about emergency updates, and guests began to avoid Stitch's Great Escape entirely. In March 2005, Disney did end up making some changes to the attraction, but the only change of any note was modifying the show's ending where Stitch rides Astro Orbiter, to instead show him climbing Cinderella Castle, presumably just done to use a more obvious landmark. But Stitch's Great Escape didn't receive any sort of major overhaul to improve the experience. Fans still hated it, young kids still cried over it, and people continued to avoid it, as attendance sank rapidly after its first year of operation. Stitch as a character was still heavily pushed across the parks, mainly through merchandising. But by 2006, just 2 years after it had opened, the wait times at Stitch's Great Escape were typically only around 10 to 15 minutes. Strangely enough, the show didn't rapidly close like Journey into Your Imagination or the Discovery Riverboats did, and it actually remained this way for the rest of the decade. And in 2011, when the Enchanted Tiki Room under new management was finally closed, Stitch's Great Escape inherited the reputation of being the very worst operating attraction at Walt Disney World. In the 2010s, things only got worse, as it seemed like Disney was starting to slip on its maintenance. By 2014, particularly outspoken fans were reporting that lighting effects, seat movement, and Stitch's spitting weren't working properly or were completely broken. An especially bad sign for Stitch's Great Escape in particular, considering this was what the entire attraction was based around. And there were also complaints that the attraction in general was just becoming dirtier and more run down. On September 21st, 2016, Disney announced that Stitch's Great Escape would enter seasonal operation, closing on October 1st to operate only during the park's busier months. This was undoubtedly the beginning of the end for Stitch. Disney attractions rarely survive very long once they become seasonal, and very few, if any, ever make it back to year-round operation. And with the popularity of Stitch as a character much lower than it had been a decade prior, it didn't seem very likely that Stitch's Great Escape would come back from this. During the closure, Disney decided to use the entrance hall as a character meet and greet area, naming it Stitch's Alien Encounter Character Greeting. The sign outside was switched out, and inside, the Prisoner Teleport Center theming acted as a cheap backdrop for photos. And a really terrible one at that, because it couldn't even fully fit into the photos. For the next couple of years, the area would jump back and forth between being a meet and greet spot and an operating show. In 2017, the attraction was also briefly used as a trick-or-treat area for Mickey's Not So Scary Halloween Party, with guests walking through the pre-show room as Sir waved at them through looping animations, but also in complete silence, before they were herded towards the exit without going through the main theatre. And on January 6th, 2018, Stitch's Great Escape would run its final showing for the holiday season before entering another closure. But as it would turn out, this one would be permanent. Disney assured fans that the attraction would return once again, but wouldn't say when. However, this statement appeared to be contradicted when just a few months later, photos and videos surfaced online taken by a handful of Disney World's urban explorers. Sneaking into the attraction through side entrances, they shared footage of the main theatres with their seating and large set pieces still intact, but with several of the animatronics stripped to pieces, looking incredibly worse for wear, seemingly prepared for removal. There was no chance that the attraction would reopen in the summer. It remained closed through 2018 and 2019, with just the meet and greet operating in the space. In March 2020, the entirety of Disney World was temporarily closed as a result of the global pandemic. And when it reopened, character meet and greets across the resort were suspended. And finally, on July 16, 2020, Disney confirmed what people had already known for 2 years. Stitch's Great Escape was now permanently closed. Less than a month later, the sign for the character meet and greet was taken down, showing that Disney had no intention of bringing that back either. And the following year, the building sat completely unused, blocked off from guests. In the aftermath of the official announcement, speculation began about what would replace the show. One of the most prominent rumors at the time was that Disney would reuse the theater seating for a Wreck-It Ralph attraction, utilizing VR headsets, most likely based on the Sugar Rush Races part of the film. According to the same rumors though, as time went on, this was downgraded first to a 3D show, then a 2D show, and eventually just cancelled entirely. But the consensus in 2020 was that something must be coming soon. After all, they wouldn't just leave the area abandoned for years. This is exactly what happened. According to some cast members, the area is currently used as a temporary break room, with the signage and theatre seating still intact. The Disney urban exploring craze largely died off at the end of the 2010s, but in the last few years there have been occasional attempts to look inside the building, with most not venturing further than the entrance hall. It should of course go without saying, but don't try this. The exterior sign for the teleportation center still sits above the building, as do several banners bearing the logo. But as of 2024, Stitch's Great Escape still sits in disuse, closed to guests, with no official announcements of what's to come. From the beginning, Stitch's Great Escape just couldn't figure out what it wanted to be. The whole point of Disney redoing Alien Encounter in the first place was that it wanted to make a version of the attraction that kids wouldn't be scared of. But it sort of missed the point on exactly why kids were so scared of it in the first place. Yes, it was partially because there was a scary looking alien that ate people, but it was more just because the lights went off, and the touch effects were freaky. Think about what makes young kids scared of these sorts of theme park rides. The story and the characters are obviously part of it, but before any of that, it's because they're dark, loud, and unfamiliar. And if you haven't addressed that, it hardly matters how cute and friendly the characters may be. And so what you ended up with Stitch was this really unhappy middle ground, where older guests didn't like the redo because it had become cartoony and gross, and younger guests didn't like it because it was still too frightening for them. Meaning it just appealed to no one. Maybe about the only people it would have appealed to were like 12-year-old boys, but to be honest, they would have probably just liked Alien Encounter anyway. Disney was judging scariness from an adult's perspective, not a kid's one. It doesn't matter if you've changed the dialogue, what 8-year-old is listening to the dialogue? Of course, the cause of all these problems really was just what causes all of these sorts of attraction redos to fail: money. Or rather, lack of it. There wasn't enough time or money given to the project to change Alien Encounter in any meaningful way. The budget constraints meant that it had to maintain so many of its core elements, which was always going to result in Stitch inheriting Alien Encounter's problems too. Except now it was just a worse version because everything was a retrofit. There were of course some cool elements. The Stitch animatronic was really impressive, just as the Aoa animatronic had been in under new management, and honestly, I kind of liked the self-referential Stitch travels to Disney World scene. But ultimately, the attraction was still pretty terrible. As I said, as of right now, it seems like the area is still sitting unused, with very little sign of any change. I do hope that sometime soon, Disney puts some actual resources into opening a new, much better attraction in this space. Because of the size constraints, I don't really foresee it being used for anything other than another theatre in the round show, but if they are going to do something, it really needs to have more care put into it than Stitch did. Something made because it's worth making, and makes sense for a theatre show, not something built because it's a quick fix. Let me know what you think about Stitch's Great Escape. Did you ever visit the attraction or Alien Encounter? And what do you hope will happen with it in the future? Let me know in the comments. Anyway, other than that, if you haven't already, please consider hitting subscribe, as new videos about theme parks are always coming in the future, and as always, I'll see you next time.